Today, we've got this BMW F87 M2 Competition in with us for some serious suspension upgrades. The M2 Competition is a great chassis with near perfect weight distribution and a phenomenal power to weight package. However, the chassis as standard is quite limited in terms of adjustment. So we're going to have to fit some adjustable aftermarket components so we can get the most out of the car and get as much grip as physically possible. The rear end of the BMW M2 features some adjustment as standard in the form of a camber and a toe bolt, which has an eccentric washer, so gives us a small range of movement where we can get some settings on the back. However, those bolts are quite limiting to the settings we can actually achieve, especially if you're building a car more for track use. You're going to want to unlock a little bit more adjustment. So the arms are standard, look a lot like this. So this is a rear upper camber arm. This is one of two in the system on each side. And as you can see, it's just a fixed length arm, one piece with a rubber bush on the inside. So this item in itself isn't adjustable. The only point of adjustment is at the bottom on the coffin arm with the eccentric washer. So to get the adjustment that we need at the back end, we're going to swap out the standard arms that look like this, and we're going to replace them with an aftermarket option like this. So there's quite a lot of arms on the market that offer adjustability for the BMW platforms. This is our own make and design. So this is our Suspension Secrets rear upper camber arm. They come as a set of four for the F8X BMWs. And as you can see here, they have an adjuster outboard which sets the length of the arm and unlocks a whole range of adjustment at the rear end. So this takes away all of the limitations that the standard adjustment has and gives us a much bigger range of adjustment, so we can get a lot more camber and a lot more toe and a lot more traction out of the rear end, and we can achieve the settings that we're aiming for to get as much grip out of this car as possible. The standard arms all have rubber bushes in them at least one end. These rubber bushes give a lot of flex, whereas the aftermarket arms on the market are all predominantly rose jointed or spherical bearings, so they remove that movement from the system and they make the whole rear end a lot more solid. Now this may sound quite aggressive, but what that actually achieves is that the settings you set on the back end stay there. Otherwise, as you're going through the corner with a standard arm, the rubber bushes flex very slightly and they actually alter the camber and the toe settings as the wheel and tyre is loaded throughout the corner, as the G's are being put through the chassis. When they're solid jointed and you've set that setting, the force comes in at one end and is transferred through the arm into the chassis with no flex or movement from the arm itself. This also means that inputs are more directly translated into the chassis a lot faster, giving a much quicker response in the chassis to driver input. So the turning is felt sooner in the chassis as the force is sent more rapidly through the component into the chassis and creates a directional change. So there's quite a few added benefits to going solid over the rubber. So that's the main reason we opt for a solid joint in these arms. At the rear of the car, we've fitted all adjustable arms. So we've got the two rear upper camber arms installed. We've got the rear toe arm and the traction arm all fitted with our adjustable arms. The reason we've done this is to achieve more camber than is available as standard, and it also unlocks the ability to adjust the camber and the toe independently without having to consider the other. So as standard with the two adjusters, there becomes a point in the camber adjustment where toe in is no longer achievable using the standard adjustment. This is where the aftermarket toe arm comes in. So as we get more camber for track use, we can use our adjustable toe arm to achieve a longer length effectively to give us the toe setting that we're trying to achieve. So it means that we're not limited and we don't have to take any other factor into account when we're choosing camber and toe settings, as we'll be able to achieve exactly what we're looking for. The traction arm is quite an interesting component in the rear suspension system. So we can install that traction arm at an exact length, which is different than the standard arm's length. This alters the kinematics of the rear hub and it alters the way that the hub rotates on throttle. So as the rear goes into compression, we alter the arc pattern by setting the arm at a different length. And this means that under compression on throttle, it rotates the hub forward very slightly and digs the leading edge of the tyre into the ground. This means that as you come to corner exit and you apply the throttle, the rear squats, putting this arm into its arc pattern, rotating the hub and digging the tyre mechanically into the ground. This gives a lot more corner exit traction, hence the name traction arm, and it allows the car to hook up and get on the throttle earlier after the apex. Up at the front, there's a few upgrades on the car that have been installed prior to coming here. So they've got the InTrax 1K2 coilover kit fitted, which gives height adjustment and damping adjustment. So this means that we can set the ride height where we want it, we can corner away the car, and we can set the rake angle. Alongside that, we can also set the dampers front and rear to get the distribution we're looking for to get the chassis working dynamically where we'd like it. So this comes down to sort of fine tuning how the chassis moves out on track and out on the roads as well. It's also got upgraded brakes at the front with the AP Racing Pro 5000 calipers and the uprated discs as well. So we've got a better braking package, and this package also fits under an 18-inch rim, which is really important for the track BMWs, as most of the tyre options that are used on track are on an 18-inch wheel. So that's where packaging a large caliper comes into play to make sure that it all fits and works together when you're choosing your tyres as well. This car also has a really nice brake cooling upgrade. So it's got the M2 CS racing style brake ducts, which come in through the front bumper, the two nostrils, and they feed air straight through into these pipes, and they're fed into a back plate on the back of the discs, which blow cool air straight into the braking system that vent through the discs and cool the brakes really effectively. So you get less fade and the brakes last a lot longer as well, and there's much less chance of overheating when they're being used really hard out on circuit. A further upgrade to the front suspension system is our Suspension Secrets solid front control arm bushes. So these bushes go in the front control arm in a forward direction, and they're a solid bush. So they house an OEM BMW solid bearing, which is booted and is actually out of the rear suspension system as factory, that we've machined a housing for to house that into the front control arm. This replaces the OEM big rubber bush. This rubber bush has a lot of flex and a lot of movement in it. So under really heavy braking, especially with a sticky tyre, there's quite a lot of flex in that big front rubber bush. This gives slightly unstable steering at the front, can lead to corner entry understeer after heavy braking, and it also gives a really slight wiggle in the steering as you're applying the brakes really heavily. As you feel that front load, you'll just feel the front move around like this, and that's that rubber bush moving around. So with the solid bearing in there, it's much more stable under heavy braking, and you can really get on the brakes and the steering stays really nice and straight, and you can get it nice and pointy on the turn-in, and all the grip is coming through the tyre rather than being absorbed and moved around by that bush. So the tyre is much less unsettled on corner entry, giving much less understeer and a pointier front end. So it also gives a lot more driver confidence having that bush in there, and it takes away a lot of the negatives of the heavy braking through that bush on track. The final bit up front is the uprated I-back anti-roll bars with the adjustable drop links. It's a bit easier to see that on the rear, so we'll move to the back and we'll run through the benefits of having uprated anti-roll bars. At the rear of the car, we can see the uprated I-back anti-roll bar and adjustable drop link. So anti-roll bars are a really nice feature to upgrade, especially on the BMW chassis. So with an uprated roll bar, they're thicker than standard, which means they're stiffer and they have less flex in them. So as you're going through a corner, the wheels will flex less in difference to each other, and the chassis will physically roll less than before. So it keeps the chassis a lot flatter and more stable through the corners. A really nice side effect of these roll bars is that in a straight line, as you're going over bumps and sort of using the car on a day-to-day basis on the road, there's no increase in the stiffness of the suspension. So riding bumps will feel exactly the same. If you go over, say, a speed bump, the car will ride it exactly the same. However, through the corner, that is the only time that the roll bar becomes active, so it only increases the cornering stiffness of the car, which makes them a really neat upgrade. So you don't have to take the usual downsides of a stiff spring, which would be a really hard ride, and you get the benefits of running a stiffer spring effectively through the corners to keep the chassis much flatter. The lack of roll and wallowing as well gives a lot more driver confidence and feedback, and it also means that the car feels a lot more controllable and a lot more stable, especially at high speed through corners. Attached to each roll bar front and rear is an adjustable drop link. So these again are our own that we machine here in-house, and they give adjustment into the system. So when you lower a car, especially on the BMW chassis, and this is mainly at the front end where this becomes an actual problem, is the positioning of the roll bar changes. So as the chassis lowers, the wheel stays in the same place, and the roll bar gets physically pulled up by the drop link. And with the shape of the roll bar at the front, this puts the roll bar in a position where it can make contact with the chassis. So fitting an adjustable drop link at the front means we can adjust the length of those drop links to move the roll bar back into its OEM position, so it has no chance of hitting anything when it's being used to its duration of movement. The other benefit is when we're corner weighing a car, the ride heights around the car end up very slightly different to each other. If the drop links were the same length as one another, fixed like standard, this means that that difference in ride height would put some tension into the anti-roll bar. This tension would be carried in a straight line, and it means that through one corner, the tension would increase through the corner, whereas through the other direction, it would unload the roll bar back to zero and then reload it as it enters the corner. This makes the chassis all of a sudden go quite soft and then firm again, which can lead to the car becoming quite unsettled, especially if it's only one anti-roll bar, say the rear. So if the rear was doing that and the front wasn't, then as you went through the corner, the car would feel soft, grip, and then it would ungrip as it went really stiff all of a sudden. So it's key to get those roll bars to be unstressed at ride height after corner weighing by adjusting the drop links to be slightly different lengths to each other to take that strain out. This means that the car in a straight line has unloaded roll bars, and then as it enters a left or a right corner, it loads that roll bar evenly, giving the same feeling in each direction, which is really key to getting confidence in a car and really getting to drive it fast and having that comfort. We've got all those parts installed on the M2 now, so it's across to the main ramp now to have a full corner weight alignment carried out to get our track settings installed on this car, so we can get the most out of having those components fitted and get the most out of the tyre as well. We're going to be installing these components on a step-by-step basis on our M3 project, which we're also running on this channel. So make sure to subscribe if you want to follow that series so you can see how each component affects the chassis on a case-by-case basis.